Okay, so do we see my screen here?
I can see.
All right, awesome. Okay, so where to begin? Let's make sure that I'm in the correct branch. All right, so where to begin? I think I want to start, of course, because Mocha runs in the browser and command line. Let's just start with how it starts running on the command line. I'm not sure of your familiarity with Node, but basically you can define a executables, one or more executables in your package. And Mocha actually has two, and I'll explain why in a minute. So here we define this executable Mocha. When you go to npm install, if you do like a global install of Mocha, it will put this in your path and that in your path, and these are the files it uses. And so let's take a look at this one. So this one was in here. And so, there's a lot of, we get a lot of warnings here, but at any rate, so the first thing you're going to see at the top of a file like this is going to be the shebang. And this does work on Windows too. I don't know how NPM really does it, but what they do is they create like a wrapper around this, which invokes Node and basically just calls this file with a Node interpreter. And so this is basically it. So it checks for node flags and then invokes the real Mocha executable. Okay, so it goes down here and it looks for node flags. When you say something like node help, so you're going to see all this junk. And these things in here are basically replicated up here. And so what this is really doing is allowing you to pass flags just like you would pass them into the node executable, but with the Mocha executable. And so it just grabs everything that it knows about out of the arguments and ends up spawning the Mocha binary, which is right next to it, underscore Mocha. And so it gets all this crap and it spawns this process. And so that one is here. And so this is where things start to get more interesting. Here we start doing things like, and a lot of this hasn't been touched in a very long time. Mocha's code base has existed since 2011, and so it's had a lot of time to get all crafty and gross. So it uses Commander, I believe, to set up a bunch of options and whatnot. And these are the options you see when you type Mocha --help. I believe it. Right. It does something weird in here where no, I can't. I couldn't even tell you. But when you type Mocha Help, I think it spawns this anyway and just like dumps the help. And then it does this like nasty override of what the actual executable name is. But at any rate, so Commander will go through and you set up all your options in here. certain things do stuff. So this like init, for example, will initialize a client-side Mocha setup, and so it grabs some files and gives you an index.html, and it just basically gives you the most basic setup to open index HTML in your browser and run some tests. There are, of course, the list of reporters that you can choose from, the list of interfaces. So what's a reporter? So the reporter is just, you know, you run your tests, and the reporter is what comes out the other side. It tells you which passed, which failed, how they failed, if any tests were skipped. Interfaces is something that's unique to Mocha, I think, as a test framework. It gives you several different ways to write your tests. The most, the default one, or most commonly used one, is the BDD style, which looks like pretty much everything here is written in that style, where you see describe, before each, it, and so that's BDD style. But there's also like TDD style and some other ones. Here's an explanation of what TDD looks like. It's pretty much exactly the same as BDD, but with a different function. It's kind of silly. So how I just? Oops. Okay. And so back at here, so we have all these interfaces. There's one that even looks like QUnit, and so you can sort of like copy and paste QUnit tests into Mocha and just run them. The problem being that, of course, Mocha doesn't have the assertion library that QUnit does or anything like that. So you'd have to still replace it. But looks like, okay, here's the handler for the require. And so require is commonly used. When you run Mocha on the command line and you give it this require syntax, what you're saying is load this file before you load anything else. And a typical usage might be, say your tests need to be transpiled by Babel. You would say something like Babel register. Or maybe you have some fixtures set up that maybe put things in the global context. I often do this, where I have a fixture file that grabs the expect function out of chai and puts it in the global context, so I don't have to require it in every file. And then I would have, like, you know, fixtures or something. And then we just load this up before it started executing our tests. Mocha Ops is a thing. Mocha.ops is like, it's a file you can stuff in your test directory, and basically all it is a new line separated list of default command line options. And so if I were to go into Mocha and run Mocha, it would pick this up and it would execute the tests with these flags. You can do something like, I think there's an option to turn it off. But that's what Mocha Ops is. It's a very crude kind of way to save default execution behavior. I think it might make more sense to have like an RC file or something someday. But anyway, so back here, reporter options are the thing. Some reporters will actually have options that you can pass to them. I think one of them might be the XUnit reporter. I believe, yeah, I'm not sure what else does, but so you can choose your reporter. There's all the reporters live in this lib reporters. There's a ton of them. The default reporter up until like a year or two ago was the dot reporter, which is a very minimal output. The reporter that is now the default is the spec reporter, which gives you more information. It will actually write out the title of your suite and the title of your test and that sort of thing. The dot reporter just gives you dots, and if things pass or fail, you see either colored dots. I believe this was recently changed to actually show different characters if something fails, but so I don't even know where that is. So reporters, blah, 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 we can flip flags and the colors. There's all sorts of little flags and different things you can use. Timeout is one that says, okay, if you specify that on the command line, you can say something like, okay, none of my tests should take any longer than 5 seconds to execute or something like that. I believe the default is 200 milliseconds. But I'm not actually, maybe it's 2000. And then slow will, it's kind of like timeout, except if a test is slow, it's like the threshold at which to report the test is running slowly. Yeah, not a big deal, but bail, a lot of people use this. This will fail the entire test suite. So if you're running multiple test files, if bail is enabled, it will stop on the first error. It will stop on the first test failure. Otherwise, Mocha will continue to run more files and more tests. grep, of course, will let you search for suite and test titles and only run those which match. Yeah, I don't know what else is. Async only forces you to use, it's not a big deal. Delay is a thing that people wanted where you can actually delay the start of the test run until an explicit moment if you need to run some async code before you start describing your tests. Let's see, retries was recently added, which says, and this is mostly for functional type tests, which will say, okay, my test failed, but it needs to fail, let's say 3 times or something to actually fail, just to try to avoid, if you have some flaky tests due to network latency or whatever. Now, the custom compiler support was written with CoffeeScript in mind. A lot of people will do this, which is so a lot of people do compilers.js, Babel register, or Babel for register. And that's not really necessary because when you use compilers, what you're doing here is saying, okay, everything with this extension will be handled by this compiler. And of course, the default extension that Babel uses is JS, and so unless you had your Babel files in something like a ES6 extension or something like that, you wouldn't need to use compilers. You just use register, require. We'll do the same thing. Babel core register was the way you used to do this. Now they recommend it's that. But this was, again, it was originally written for CoffeeScript, and so you could say Mocha compilers coffee, and then you would give it the CoffeeScript register, or whatever the name of the module is that does this. For those who aren't aware what registering compilers is, so in Node there's the require function, which allows you to load a JavaScript module. When you can register an extension, and when require finds something with that extension, it will pass it through the compiler if you've registered the compiler for that extension. That's kind of how Webpack works, probably under the hood. Okay, so blah, 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 blah. UI, the UI again is the interface. The default one is BDD. You can pick something else if you wish. So this is, I'm not sure if that's true anymore, but when you just go in here and you just type Mocha, it'll run all tests in the test directory on the first level, and so it won't dig into it. And so if I just say Mocha, it'll start running my tests using the dot reporter because that was in my Mocha Ops, and that runs all the tests specified here. And in Mocha Ops, of course, it says, okay, use the dot reporter, which is what we saw here. There's like a yellow one or two, which means these are slow. And this one got skipped. So back in here, at this point, it looks like we are looking for the files. We're going to gather a list of files to load up. And we don't do anything with them yet. We resolve them, we get the proper path for them. And so this is a thing, watch. And if you're looking at the Mocha issues, you will see a lot of open issues around the watch functionality. The watch functionality was very basic and only really catered to a specific use case of watch, of basically re-executing tests when the code changed. And among the things that it did not consider when it was implemented was Babel, because Babel in translation didn't exist at the time. This may have worked with CoffeeScript or something somehow, but I see a lot of issues come through complaining about. It doesn't look like it ever worked with CoffeeScript actually, but whatever. So. Yeah, actually, you might have this. This might. No, I have no idea. There's a lot of issues around this. Sometimes it doesn't work in Windows. Sometimes it's if you change your source file, well, it doesn't rerun the tests because your tests actually run the transpiled file, and that's all it knows about. Blah 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 blah. So, I would like to actually deprecate Watch, move it into another program, or find a reasonable alternative, because this is not something that Mocha can really afford to maintain and do well. I feel it's well outside the scope of what Mocha really needs to be concerned with. There are other tools that do this so much better than Mocha itself. And I try to point people to them, but they always see this one and then they're surprised it doesn't work, but I'm not really surprised it doesn't work. At any rate, so there's this like rerun thing that happens when the watch triggers and blah 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 blah. So, and buried in this else is, oh hey, this is what happens when you don't actually watch, which is But at any rate, it gathers a list of files, stuffs them in there, and it runs. It says Mocha run and get a runner back, and then it does some wacky things around aborting and exiting the process, and there's some helper functions here, but it's how it runs stuff. And so it runs stuff in, let's see, yep, that. All this everything else in here, pretty much, that doesn't start with Mocha, is specific to the command line. And so when I require the parent directory in Node, you're going to look down here, you're going to find index, and I'm just going to go back and, I mean, this is kind of silly, but whatever. So we go in here and we grab Mocha.ps. And so 2011, okay. So this is like a main class. It's also, when you require Mocha, if you're trying to use it programmatically, this is what you get back. you know, there's quite a bit of stuff that it exposes. Now, and so where is it? So here's the, like, this is the constructor. So it is a like a pseudo class. In here you can, there are functions to set the options, and so back in the real executable, you're going to see, you know, like if we look for bail in here. Oops. So blah 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 blah. Or Mocha, okay, bail. That's strange, but anyway, like grep, for example. So mocha.grep, we have a Mocha instance at this point, and we're just calling the grep function in it, and not really. And then so the grep function is called, and this is how we set an option. I'm not sure I really like this pattern, but it's used. You're gonna, if you're using Mocha in the browser, you're gonna find yourself using these functions. Generally speaking, if a function is for public consumption, it is marked as such, but there's no reasonable documentation other than the source of these things at this point. And so what happens when you run? So we have this like mocha.files thing. And again, this is only how the command line interface works. But so files, what is files? So we back in here we did a new Mocha somewhere. No, not there. Okay, there it is. Conspicuous lack of parentheses, but you can say mocha.files is something or other, somewhere in here. And then we'll have this run. And so run will look for this file's length. It goes ahead and loads them up. I don't know if that... Okay, and so what's happening here is that load files is called. Okay, and so load files gets this list of file paths, and for each file path, it basically, let's see, it gets a suite, which is the root suite, if we're calling load files for the first time. And so the root suite is this like, you don't see it, you can't rename it, but it's always there, and all other suites and tests belong to it one way or another. And so, you know, maybe a tree hierarchy of suites and tests and stuff. But for all intents and purposes, this is the root suite. And for each of these files, we go and we emit this pre-require thing, and this is weird and stuff, but what happens here? The thing that listens for this is the interface. And if your interface is BDD, which is the default, it's going to listen for that pre-require, and it's going to expose a bunch of functions that it chooses in the second parameter. And the second parameter happens to be the global context. And so what we do is the interface catches this event. It stuffs a bunch of things in global, and I'm not sure what it does with file, probably nothing right off the bat, but this basically readies the global context to require the test. And so that is how you can have a test file, and this describe function is available to you, because before this file was loaded by Mocha, this pre-require fired, and global was filled with stuff, and one of the things that it was filled with was the describe function. And so the next thing that happens is we actually require the file, and file would be, for example, this test that I just opened. It might have been this file, and then it executes the file. And so when it executes, it says, oh, well, I have this describe in my global context. I'll go ahead and run it. And then just kind of following the way things go, we can just take a look in interfaces, BDD. And in here, here's our listener for pre-require. This context is the global context here. And this is where we like attach things to it, okay? And describe is one of the things. And so when you are running your this test, this describe is this describe. And what happens is it calls this create function in this common file here. This used to be a whole lot of repeated code, but okay, so there should be a suite.create. Okay, suite.create. What happens when you create a suite? Well, there's this like suite pseudo class, and we call create, and set up some stuff, and then before we do anything else, we execute the callback function if it exists. And so, for example, here we execute this function right away as soon as we get this described. And so that will go and run, and this describe will be called. And it's the same function, but what's happening here is, and this is bizarre. So we have an array of suites, and the first thing on the array is the root suite. And when you call describe, you prepend something to the list. The next time you call describe, if we happen to be in a nested context, so we call it once, and now the suite that was created is the first thing in that suites array. And so we call it again. And so back here, when we create this, says, oh, the parent is the first thing in that array. And of course, if you only have one thing in the array, the parent is always the root suite, which, of course, the parent of this is going to be the root suite. Anyway, and so it keeps like prepending suites to this array, and then it executes them. And once the suite execution is finished, it shifts them off the front. And so then, once the suite is done executing, like, so here's one. The suite is shifted off the front of that array, and the parent is once again this suite, and then this one is executed in serial, and its parent is a reference to that. And that's how we keep it kind of straight. That's how we create this hierarchy of context and tests. One thing it's important to note, and this trips up a lot of beginners, maybe a lot, but a fair amount, is that suites are always executed as soon as they're encountered, but tests and hooks are not. So you may be new to JavaScript or testing BDD style with this, or maybe you've never used RSpec or JBehave, which are Mocha is loosely based on. But those guys will allow you to find these suites, and then it allows you to declare a test, but it doesn't run it. And you declare it, doesn't run it, and it goes through this whole thing. And it goes through, in Mocha's case, it goes through every single file that it needs to go through, running all the suites in a depth-first fashion, and kind of creating test objects with functions and references to the context of those functions and everything. And so once it is done, let's see here. This is like kind of the call stack. So, all right. So we required the file, post require. Okay. Post require, I don't think it does anything at all. I don't think anything's listening for that. But load files is, let's see, I believe it's, yeah, okay. Oh, for crying out loud. Load files, this should be called a run. Okay, so load files, and then we go through here, we create this runner thing. Configure the runner with some of the options that we know about. And so all of the files, by this point, all of the files, even right here, all the files have been parsed, all the tests have been set up, and we're just kind of post-processing the options or whatever we need to do, and everything's ready to go. We call render.run, and we get this callback done, and that's what happens. And so this runner object gets this function, and it basically goes through all the suites in order. There's some filtering and fancy stuffs and all sorts of things in here, but it goes through them, and let's see, it should be calling start. Where's that? Fine. Okay. So let's see. He calls this run suite function. Okay. So now it has a suite. Now it runs a suite, and this can cause stack. This is kind of like tail recursion in a way, but what it does is it will go through every suite that it knows about, and in order it will execute the hooks and tests and everything. But it does this recursively. Somebody came along with a PR at some point and had to break the call stack because they had so many tests. And of course, this was like tail recursion, and so the call stack would just like grow and grow and grow and grow and grow the more tests and suites you had. It's somewhere here. It's not in this file, but it actually breaks the call stack. And so when you call run suite, what's that? Definition. Okay, so here's a run suite. Run tests. Okay, and now it has those run tests. And so run tests takes a suite, and the suite's full of tests, and then iterates through them. And so a test is actually, so there's a test pseudo class, which is not that interesting. The interesting one is runnable. And I believe, the way JavaScript does, kind of like extending pseudo classes or whatever. I believe that this is actually a test, but the hook actually is also a runnable. And so the runnable will have all of these functions exposed. And so this gets confusing. So when you're in a Mocha test, and let's just try to find one. So, great. All right. When you're in a Mocha test, and again, I'm not sure what you know about JavaScript, but in JavaScript functions, you will have a reference to this. This is always going to be an object, and so what is it? That's a good question. You would have a this here, and say you did that, and we're in the suite. And then maybe we said something like, so one time before this test run, we would, like that. Let me see. This here is this here plus. Okay. So we would append underscore bar, and then say back in the test. Finally, we would say this here is this here plus as. And so if I were to console log this here, what would be the result? It would be something like because this, and the suite is not the same context in the hooks in the test. All hooks and tests share the same context. Suites do not. And so I think, let me see here. So this like context, right? And so there's kind of an unnecessary conflation of like runnable and context. Actually, so there's this context thing here, and context is this. If you're in a test, and context actually just kind of delegates a lot of tasks to the runnable that it belongs to. Okay, and so the runnable that it belongs to is kind of it's you can think of it as the test or the hook. But so there we would see that in this context objects, we have context object, we have a timeout function. All that's doing is delegating its functionality into the runnable, which there should be a timeout in here. That's the default one, by the way. And so this is the actual implementation of this dot timeout, if you ever see it. So yeah, that is kind of like how Mocha wants to run tests. There's a lot of like inconsistency in the code base itself. We adopted ESLint at some point, but it's really like kind of, it doesn't have much teeth. Just to get it working, we had to downgrade a lot of things to warnings. We don't even look at the test directory. We should. We just ignore it when we check, but it's full of problems. So there you go. Let's see. So that's kind of like how things happen in the well, we didn't get to the report. And so you're running stuff, and as you run things, the runner will emit events, and what listens for the events, your chosen reporter will listen for the events. And so the default one is going to listen for suite, and this means, hey, I'm starting a new suite, and so it logs out that stuff. Okay, my suite's done. Test pass, here's a failed test, and it's listening for these events, and it's dumping stuff out to the console. Other things may do stuff like JSON stream. Yeah, I'm not sure about this one, but JSON reporter will actually just give you a JSON object. Again, it's pretty much just dumped the standard out as far as I know. Yeah. And so most of these, most of these reporters are just going to write the standard out console log. And the exception is this one. And we'll get to that in a second. And so we report all our passes, failures, and pending, and collect some statistics, and the reporter handles it as the tests are executed. It doesn't like execute all the tests up front and then report things. It reports things as it happens. For a test to fail, for example, the test has to throw an exception, and it can be any kind of exception, but we'll catch it as soon as it happens. Excuse me. So there's This is probably worth going over. No, that's ugly. Anyway, a test can be marked as pending or skipped in a couple ways. The UI usually has some sort of thing for it, like you can say describe.skip to skip a whole sweep, or you could say, like, if you're in a before each or something, you say this.skip. Or you can simply define a function without, or define a test without a function. And this is called a pending test, and it will be reported, but nothing happens. And it's recommended, instead of just like not writing your test or commenting tests out, it's recommended to use the pending test functionality. So at least when you run your reporter, it will be output, and you can see that, oh, I have some work to do. Otherwise, it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. So that is kind of how it works in the command line. So in the browser, so how do we do this? So it's all the same code base mostly. To make Mocha work in the browser, well, several things just don't work, but the things that do, we have this like make file. Remember, this is a long time ago. We didn't have any sort of fancy build tools, but I think this Mocha.js. Again, so this confuses people too, and I don't blame them. You're in here and you've npm installed Mocha. What do you get? Well, you get like Mocha.js, right? You go in node modules Mocha and you get this big old JS file, and you're like, what? I thought that was Mocha, but it's not. This is the version that we want to use in the browser. It should be in like a disk directory or something like that, but it's not. And so we use Browserify to basically load up Mocha and bundle it for the browser. We ignore some things that are in there that we don't need. Entry point is actually this browser entry file. And so browser entry is kind of like, how to explain it? Browser entry is kind of akin to _Mocha for the browser. It can only really be executed once, and it does all the setup. You can see here that it initializes itself with the HTML reporter, regardless of what you think. You can get around this. It's useful to use, say, for example, Phantom.js with Mocha and use console-based reporters. And actually, just see the spec output even though you're running in a headless browser. But by default, it loads up HTML because it thinks you're in a graphical browser. There's a bunch of, so process, of course, doesn't exist in the browser, but it does exist in Browserify, and Browserify has some things. It stubs this, and we can use it to okay. So yeah, here we can use the onError event, which is present in a browser, and do the same kind of uncaught exception handling that we do on the command line, sort of. There's an option that allows Mocha to just let all errors bubble up. I don't know who uses this, but instead, so if you throw an exception, it will just bubble up and the process will crash. It's kind of like bail, but yeah. So you can also do this in the browser. I don't even know what some of this crap is. I've never seen. I have no idea. But so let's see, Mocha UI. And so when you load it in the browser, you will have a global _Mocha, or not underscore Mocha, lowercase Mocha. So this is going to be in the global context. So window.mocha is this Mocha object. Okay. Okay, so this is UI function, which is just kind of a, it's a, yeah, as you can see here, it does something pretty weird. And so we have this Mocha here, but we don't call the UI function because the UI function, or you notice happened to Mocha prototype load files. Okay. Right. We have to like stub things out and like kind of work around some of the functions to get them to work. And so remember in the command line when you said load files, and it would do this pre-require thing, and would stuff all this crap in the global context like the describe function and whatnot. That's what this is doing. And so when you load Mocha in the browser, and I believe you can just see it in this like template HTML file. So load Mocha in the browser. The very first thing you must do is load Mocha. There's a style sheet, but you don't really need that. You do need this. Then we have to call this function. Setup BDD is like an alias for this UI function or whatever. And so what that does is it executes the pre-require, it like emits the pre-require thing that the chosen UI is listening for. Once again, gives it the global context. Remember, global here is window for all intents and purposes. But then it stuffs things in describe. When once you do that, then you can load your test, but not before. You can't do this because describe is not yet available. Now, I don't know if that's right or wrong, or, you know, I can think of a few better ways to do this, but that's the way it works right now. You have to load Mocha, tell it which one you want to use. It doesn't default to one for you. Probably should, but the only problem there is once you've initialized an interface, we have no way of like taking it away. You know, maybe it'd be cool for a interface to have like a teardown function or something. But at any rate, once you've chosen an interface, you're stuck with it and you can't get rid of it. And we have to not pick one by default in the browser because obviously you can't get rid of it if you don't want to use it. And so this is the way things have to happen. So load Mocha, run the setup function, tell it which interface, load your tests, and finally run it. And so browser entry, setup is just like sugar. So, but this run, the way it implements grep is with this like query string in the window location and stuff like that, but not a big deal. And so it expects the HTML reporter, I believe, DOM document not available in web workers. Okay, so document again, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Okay, so you can turn off like highlighting or whatever, but it wants this HTML reporter wants this. It needs like something with the ID of Mocha. 2-unit works like this as well. It's not that weird. But this is where Mocha starts like dumping DOM nodes and test output and stuff. I guess you can turn off the highlighting of the code if it's too slow or something. Usually when you run the tests, it shows you what passed and failed. You can click on a test and look at the code and behind it and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, this is really weird. But yeah, so people were, and I don't quite understand the use case, but people were trying to browserify Mocha itself. And I mean, you have to go through some of the song and dance with browser entry. And so we set it up so that when you try to browserify Mocha itself, you get browser entry back. And so if you want to do your own browserify, thanks. I do gotta get going here. But if you want to browserify your own bundle of Mocha for whatever reason, this will let you do it. This is a recent development. There were things that were preventing people from using Browserify with Mocha. There are things which were preventing people from using required.js with Mocha. I believe it finally works as of 3.0. Yeah, so Browserify, is this tool to take code that's written in Node and package it up for the browser. And there are other tools that Webpack purports to do it. I haven't seen it actually ever used where somebody's trying to bundle for both things. Webpack seems, obviously the name is, I guess Browserify, Webpack, whatever, but Webpack doesn't make any illusions about the code necessarily running in Node.js, and so it's not really designed to. There are plugins to make it do that, but I haven't had any success with them. And so Browserify it is for now. There's some things we needed to overwrite, like the debug function, the debug module, the events module. We have stubs for some things in here. What's an example? Lib browser. Let's see here. Lib browser. What does this look like? So, TTY. Sure, we pretend like it's a TTY and window size. I don't even know what this is for. This is a browser implementation of a progress bar or something. This event is probably not even necessary. I don't know why this is here because I'm pretty sure Browserify comes with one. It would be an event emitter implemented for the browser. And then, yeah, we just stub debug apparently. So you get no debug output in the browser. And so, yeah, then when you're in the browser, that template.js, which is the default template, this is what you're loading. You're loading this huge bundle, and by huge, I mean it's pretty big. So, oops, thank you. So yeah, 402K. We haven't made much of an effort to make this smaller. It's not minified. We could do that. It just hasn't been a priority because who cares? It's not running in production. Yeah, if you have a lot of tests running in the browser, it'll be slower probably. But at some point, I want to get this bundle size down. It just has not been a priority. Before this was browserified, Mocha still ran on the browser. It had like TJ implemented a Browserify for Mocha. It was weird and it made things very difficult. And so maybe it was about 2 years ago, we finally were able to extract it away and do it right with Browserify, if you can consider that to be right, but better at any rate. And so, yeah, I got to get going here in a sec, but last thing, all the tests, you want to run the tests, of course, you need make. This is available in Windows, Sigwin, and some other things will give you make. I don't like it. I would like all the tools to be a full JavaScript stack, but at any rate, make. You run like npm test. It runs, it does our little phony lint. Then it runs test node and test browser. Test browser uses, it regenerates the bundle for Karma Mocha. And so we use Karma and we use Karma Mocha, except we have to tell Karma Mocha to use the Mocha that we have here instead of the one that comes with Karma Mocha. Probably doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense, but we need to use a Karma plugin for Mocha to test Mocha itself. We also use Browserify in Karma. And at its most basic, what this ends up doing is it launches Phantom.js in your console. Now, you can do this sort of stuff to. So is CI1, if you have a sauce username and access key, it'll actually connect to Sauce Labs. You can do this from the command line. If you're a contributor or whatever, I can give you the username and access key. But you can run the tests across the suite of various browsers that we test in from your command line on Sauce Labs. And those are about, right now we got IE7, IE8, IE7, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and Safari. We could have more coverage here. I don't see why not, but that's pretty good for now. Finally, the CI will also run an app there, which, what does it do in app there? It just, it doesn't do a whole lot. I think it just runs a few different, it runs the Node.js test. It doesn't bother running the browser test because Travis is doing that instead. Yeah, this is the app there configuration. We have, yeah, that's about all I know. I don't know if there's anything interesting in here. Probably not. So yeah, we do have some things of this nature. Dedefine is a special thing. You can look at the Git history for that, but Travis CI is executed upon every PR, every, whoops, oh wait, this is all secure. So, but a Travis CI is executed upon every PR and merge and branch push. And so we have all these like scripts, and then there's Gitter integration here, which will dump the results in our Gitter channel. It needs to do some things. Just this, like, make sure that you can actually install Mocha at all. There's this AWS CLI. All it does is when you run Karma, it makes these bundles, and in order to debug those bundles, you need to grab them and put them somewhere, because Travis CI won't let you, I guess. But might be another way around it. But all we're doing then is we're taking the bundles, which are dumped in here, and we stuff them on S3. And I don't even know if that's public, but they should be. If you need to go and figure out why a browser test is failing, you can go and grab the bundle, which is like, it's hideous, but it's like Mocha with all the tests in it. And you can use it to debug. But anyway, I have to go. If you have questions, you can hit me up in Gitter or whatever. But yeah, thanks for listening to me drone on for an hour. And that's all I got. So see you guys later. Bye-bye.